And welcome to our continuing discussion on the Chassidic approach to joy. We're on chapter 12, which is titled A Lightning Rod to the Spiritual Realm. And this is an important piece here. This is an important factor here, understanding the dynamics at play here. So we're going to go through that one. Pirkei Avos, the Ethics of Our Fathers, says, know what is above you. Know what is above you. And the simple understanding of that is to, if you know that there's a God, there's an eye that sees and an ear that hears, and, and everything's being recorded, so your behavior can be stronger and better because you know that there's an accountability. And I think this is one of the things that's missing in our public school system today, is that, the lack of understanding that there's an eye that sees and an ear that hears and everything is recorded. The current running attitude is if you can get away with it, it's fine. If the police don't catch you, it's okay. And no, it's not. There's a bigger picture here, and that's what Pirkei Avos is really referring to. But the Maggid of Mezrich, which is the second Chassidic dynasty, he pushes the idea a little bit further, and he talks about know that everything above is from you. There's a cause and effect, and that what you do makes a difference, and it has an effect, and it has an effect that what you do affects above the spiritual realm, which in effect then turns around and affects back down the physical realm. That there's a direct correlation. How we approach things, how we see things, how we behave has a direct reflection back above, but also then back down to us. And that's an important part here that we're going to be looking into. So the Zohar talks about our material world parallels the spiritual realm. So that when we talk about, in the beginning of the Torah, we talk about God made mankind in his image. Mankind was made in God's image. So we are a reflection of the spiritual realm. And so whatever is going up in the spiritual realm, it has its correspondence down here. And in fact, when we talk about back in the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Pharaoh, and those things, we talk about the astrologers who would look into the stars and see what's coming and predict the future from what's coming. Because in that, they were able to, we don't have the skill anymore, but we were able to look into the spiritual realms and see what's coming down the line, that there's a spiritual antecedent that starts creating something. It starts coming down through the spiritual realms, and then it is manifest physically in the universe and the physical world. So when the astrologers told Pharaoh that the savior of the Jewish people has been born, that the one who will, I'm thinking of the word eclipse, that the one who will eclipse Pharaoh has been born, so they could see that coming down through the constellations as it comes down into the physical realm. I don't know how that applies today, because the astrologers of today are nonsense.
Right. I think something similar was said when Jesus was born. I don't remember who said it, but today a child was born. It's the same idea.
I was going to say the question becomes, who said it, and did you say it in advance of, or in, a lot of that. Well, let's not get into that one. That's not our purpose here.
Okay. But I thought is soothsaying predicting things, because I thought sooth is you can't be a soothsayer. I mean, there's a fine line here between.
Right. So one of the things that we don't do is, Abraham looked up into the heavens when God was blessing him and said, you'll have a child. He looked up into the spiritual realms and he said, it's not in the cards. It's not destined. And God, you see in the Chumash, in the Pasuk, it says God took him out of the tent and into the stars, meaning don't think that you and your children will be confined to the stars, confined to the natural order of things. In other words, the blessing that God is giving to Abraham is that you and your children will not be restricted to the natural order of creation. We're going to have a bypass card. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
That includes us, since we're
absolutely. That absolutely includes us. And that's the topic of today, is that exact thing which God was telling to Abraham when he pulled him out of the tent and said, you're going to be blessed with a child. And Abraham says, it's not there. It's not in the cards. It's not in that which is, coming down the world. And God's saying, you are not limited to that. You guys are not limited to that at all. So generally speaking, our material existence is merely an extension of the spiritual realm. What God is creating and God is sending down into the physical creation, that's what's manifest down here. There's no really good analogy that we have to work with this because it's such a highly spiritual concept. But the closest we could look at is the relationship between the soul and the body. While the soul and the body are together down here in the physical world, that relationship is complete. So that as long as the spirit is within the body is alive and accomplishing. If the spirit was not there, then the body is no longer alive. The same sense is that God physically is this, gives the spirit to the world. The God puts in his energy, his highest, into the physical world, and this world exists as long as that energy is continually going into it. So the creative energy that we talk about in the 6 days of creation, that's an ongoing process. That's an ongoing thing. God is continually creating the universe, and that natural order of what he's creating is exactly what happens down in the physical world. As God creates it, it's manifest in the physical world, just like the soul within the body to some degree that has its, but you see what a person what his soul is going through, whether he's anxious or he's excited, it becomes manifest in the person. You can see on their eyes and in their face, what's going on with them. How many times you walk in and you see somebody, you ask like, whoa, what's going on with you? Because you could tell, obviously, how much more so in a medical field, right? But you see that. So the soul and the body, they function as a single entity. We talked about last week the idea that Pharaoh, on his birthday, redeemed some people from prison, including, we talked about the butler, right? And that's a normal thing during a king's coronation or a king's birthday or a king's wedding. They're so over happy and overjoyous that they just pardon people, all kinds of things that they might not otherwise do because of their happiness. So in the spiritual realm, if there's a great, a great spiritual kindness or happiness that can manifest itself down in the physical world. We talk about, for example, when a gentle rain comes down into the world, we know that it's a good time on high because it's a gentle rain that's coming down. But if it's the opposite of a gentle rain, catastrophic rain, so obviously something not good is going on in the spiritual realm as well, because it's just being manifest down here in the physical world. So what do we do with that information? It's nice to know that, but what do we do with that information? Well, this dual dynamic, it goes two ways, right? So knowing, and this is what the Maggid of Mezrich was talking about, is knowing that what is going on above is from you, is a reaction to you, that God looks down on the world and he set a natural path of how things ought to play themselves out. But how we behave can affect that. So if we are particularly doing good things, then that turnarounds and manifests itself in a response that God then sends down, more revealed goodness into the world. And, parents see this all the time in the sense that, a parent, I remember reading a book about fatherhood. I was in high school at the time, but I was reading a book about fatherhood and poetry. And the part of the poem was saying, in a couple of stanzas, we're talking about what a rotten day he's had at work and how terrible things have gone. And then he walks in the door and 2 words change everything. Hi, Dad.
Mm.
And all of the things that went wrong in the day are washed clean. And you know, your heart warms up and everything's fine. The world is good because we just had, hi, Dad. So the same thing. One of the things that I talk about with my kids all the time, but you know, it's something we all see, is that when kids get along, parents are happy. When kids go out of their way to take care of each other, parents are even happier. That nachas starts to flow. Have you ever tried to explain the Yiddish word nachas to somebody?
I don't think so.
There's no English equivalent because it's pride, but it's not pride.
Okay.
You were gonna say?
No, I don't know. I was going to say feeling good, but it's more than that. I mean,
Yeah, it's feeling good. It's pride. It's a satisfaction. But it's more. You know, I was going to try and describe. Well, nachas is like quelling.
Yeah.
Can't use the same. It can't Yiddish to translate Yiddish, so it doesn't work. So mankind was created in the image of God. Obviously, God doesn't have an eye, but he has something which perceives like our eye perceives. God, you know, when it says in the Torah that God said, "Let there be light," it doesn't mean that it has a mouth, but it means that concept of revealing from within out to the exterior for others to perceive, that's that type of thing. So this whole you know, God's expression into the world, but God's expression into the world can be changed by us. Just like a child greeting a parent who's had a rough day, but greeting with this great silly grin and is happy. I'm so happy to see you. And that excitement that kid has of just our being present, that changes us. And therefore we turn around to the child and we're warm and kind and loving to the child, right? And I think that attribute of, you know, knowing that we can impact that. So how practically speaking, what do you do? Well, we've had experience over the last year in this pandemic. We've had experiences where you find out that somebody has tested positive and your heart goes out and you get their Hebrew name and the mother's Hebrew name and you start adding them in your prayers and you give extra charity in their merit. And why do we do that? Because we know that when God sees how much we care, that stirs his compassion, arouses his compassion, his desire to, and that reflects back to help bringing about healing. And the more people involved, the more it is. Now, does it always work? Sometimes there's a decree that we can't.
Sorry.
We're good.
Okay, got answered.
So sometimes there's a decree that we can't overcome, you know, but there's no loss in the effort because it still brings down rachamim rabim, divine mercies on the world. Maybe not to save that particular person, but it certainly, you know, it does make a change. I always think of the person who says, you know, don't think that your prayers are in vain. God always answers. It's just sometimes the answer is still no. You know, but we have to do what we can. And so this idea of know what is above you is dependent on you, that everything that happens in the spiritual realm is determined by our behavior, because whatever we do activates that counterpart in the spiritual realm, and that spiritual activity then brings down, changes back down into the world. So, you know, we do have an impact. And I think that knowledge is so critical because so many times people feel nothing I can do. I remember a child, one of our children, who was very distressed and had an emotional reaction every time they heard a fire engine or a police siren, right? And it caused the child to have a distress reaction. And what we taught the child was, you can always say prayers. You can always say Tehillim. You can always say Psalms. There's never a situation where there's nothing you can do. You can always do something, and if that may be only to add in your prayers, that whatever should happen is to have a better outcome, but you're not impotent. You are not powerless. You can do something. And I think knowing that your prayers and your acts of goodness and kindness and your act of giving charity, that does make a difference. It may not make all the difference that has to happen, but it does make a difference, and you are not powerless. And knowing you're not powerless makes a big difference on a person's self-confidence and the way the person presents to the world. People give up because they feel that there's nothing they can do. You can do something. And that your actions have a positive influence. They do generate a spiritual response of some kind. And so therefore, whenever a person gives a blessing, that blessing has power, and you can make an effect. So in that realm, the Mittel Rebbe, the second Lubavitcher Rebbe, had an expression called Tracht gut wird zein gut. Think good, and it will be good. And this was not only in response to negative stimulus, but on a day-to-day basis. If you have a positive approach to things, if you have a confident approach to things, if you tracht gut, if you think positively, it will bring out good. Now, it's not just a feel-good thing. It makes a difference, right? Because if you put yourself in a positive mindset, if you put yourself in a sense of knowing that God cares and knowing that God cares how you respond to something, gives you the power to actually do something about it. And the more you have a positive outlook, the more you have a positive thought towards things, it actually creates the change. If a person thinks negative things are going to happen, okay, so that's what we manifest then, right? But if we focus on good, then we can help produce the good effect. And the story in that particular case was a person who had a health situation with his son, and he was very concerned. But the Rebbe said, Tracht gut wird zein gut, and so he worked on that, and he celebrated. And by the time he got home, the kid had a marked change in his health. So when a person is in high spirits, the person functions better, and thinking positive things brings about positive change. So if we envision good things, if we and you think about an Olympic athlete who runs a race, they've run that race 100 times in their mind. Amongst pilots, they talk about chair flights. It's not the right wording, but basically you sit down in your chair and you think through the entire flight plan and all the things you have to do, the whole checklist and everything before you even get in the plane. You're creating those patterns of positive thinking, and it helps to manifest good things. So by envisioning good in one's mind, we create a positive spiritual influence that helps to enable that to actually manifest itself in reality. Betochen is the same thing. Emuna is faith. Betochen is translated as trust. When you completely trust that it's going to be good, that creates this response of God saying, well, he trusts it's going to be good. That's what we deliver, right? So it creates that positive things if we stay focused on on relying on God. In fact, it's an interesting thing in the Shara B'tochen, in the gate of trust in the book of Chovesh Levavos, Duties of the Heart. It's a book that was written a long time ago, but he talks about what's the secret of the B'tochen. The secret of the B'tochen is that why should God bless me when I know I don't deserve the blessing? Well, I know I don't deserve it. I know I haven't done all the right things, so I don't really deserve the blessing. Why would God bestow the goodness on me just because I have betachon, just because I trust that God will do it? Because I trust God. That itself is a reason that he would want to do good. The betachon we put in him, the fact that we trust him, that arouses the desire to actually fulfill it. Right? So the same thing here is when a person trusts and relies on God, God creates situations that will allow him to use his energies in positive and beneficial ways. Our positive thoughts serve as the catalyst that promote favorable circumstances for us. Because we're thinking good, those opportunities come up. Because we trust in God, then God fulfills that trust. Because we were counting on him. We absolutely trust him. Well, I can't let that go, right? Even if we don't deserve the trust itself.
But the opposite is not true. I hope. If people don't think about trusting God, it doesn't mean that bad things will happen to them.
Correct. It doesn't have to play that way. But we're saying that there's a natural order of things.
Mm-hmm.
We can affect that natural order
By our thoughts.
by pushing the positive.
Okay.
By pushing the positive. Yeah. And the strongest positive is simcha. It's one thing just to, and what's the difference? A person says, I have a birthday party. Would you like to come? Versus, I'm having a birthday party. I'd love you to come. Will you please come? I really would love to have you there. The difference in those two, the first one might person say, well, I'm kind of busy. I can't. The second one would create, wow, if it's that important to you,
say no to that one.
I could cancel the other thing. Yeah, okay, I'll be there. It's that simcha, that positiveness. It's not just positive, but it's an energy that with it, the simcha part of it, that helps to create the corresponding response. When a person is happy, he stands above all his personal limitations and all of his weakness. He can do things he ordinarily could not do. He can forgive his worst enemy. His joy generates an inner energy that breaks through and shatters any barriers that could stand in the way. Simcha parts get the joy breaks through all boundaries. And the same thing happens in the spiritual realm. God has chosen to establish a natural order, which is the way things generally, the way God generally controls the world, but we can influence that through our simcha. When a person is besimcha, he creates joy in the spiritual realm. God himself is, so to speak, besimcha. It's that corresponding joy, because when someone comes in happy and go lucky and all hyped and excited, you can't help but smile.
Feel good.
And feel good, exactly. That energy creates it, and so God responds with that. This causes God to reveal a transcendent dimension not bound by the laws of causation, the laws of general of nature. And God will give great blessings and positive things start to happen, all because of the simcha, the joy that we expound. So, we've been talking about, the Chassidic approach to joy, right? So that's the idea, is that if we generate joy and not, you can start with something that's artificial, and even that can lead to it. I've watched some of these laughter classes, these laughter therapy, right? So it begins with just laugh. It doesn't matter if you don't feel it. It doesn't matter if you're not there. Go through it, right? But as you start laughing, I don't know, endorphins, or I don't know what's going on, but whatever it does, it brings you to that happy state. And the people around you can't help but start to laugh along with it. and it just creates this laughter, right? And that joy is contagious. Joy is literally contagious in a very good way. And that literally contagious even affects God. And when God's feeling good, good things come to the world as well. So the Chassidic approach to joy is, it goes back to everything God does. Nothing happens without God's power. Everything God does is good. So therefore it's all good. When it doesn't feel good, maybe we just don't understand it. Maybe there's more going on than we perceive. We're just humans. We're not, even amongst the wisest of men, we're not going to understand everything. But to be empowered with joy means that Tracht gut wird zein gut. Think good things, focus on positive things, expect positive things, have absolute trust, betachon, that God's going to deliver good things. And because of that joy, and because of that betachon, that trust, it comes out. It gets revealed. And so therefore we have to push the envelope. And so Chassidim used to be called, before the term Chassidim used to be called the Freiliche, the happy ones. If you choose to go about life with this attitude, if you choose to go about life joyous and smiling and happy, and that's your standard, that's your default position, it has a ripple effect on the people around you, on the family, and even upon God. And then that turns around and feeds right back to us as well. And that's the summation of really the focusing on the positive and how to be positive, even in difficult times. I'm not saying there aren't times to mourn. There are times to mourn, but there's a time frame to it. And then you have to go past it. And the Chassidim are always looking for the positive side of things and focusing on positive, the good, joyful things, and living a life of joy. And it's infectious of all the people around us as well. Thoughts? What do you take away from today?
Betachon.
Trust, betachon.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are the levels of how you express betachon affect how it is emulated from above? So we've learned that there are three approaches. There's thought, there's speech, and there's action. And action being the ultimate.
Right. These
So
are the
in betachon, are those levels still applicable to the response that you get from above, or is it all the same?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I would think that betachon, thought, speech, and action, these are the garments of the soul. If the betachon is there in thought, but not expressed verbally or in action, there would be something lacking to the betachon. But it also is a process. I've spent years working on betachon as an active effort to work on betachon, and I think it begins with thought, learning about betachon, reading about betachon, reading examples of stories of betachon. It begins with thought, and then to talk about it and express it and share the ideas. That makes it stronger. That makes it stronger. And then to behave in that fashion. I think that's more the greatest fulfillment of the betachon, is to behave in that fashion. And I think that there would be a corresponding relationship, that when you're thinking good things, but it's only limited to thought, your speech may not be equal to that, then God tries to prove your thoughts are right, But at the same time, we have to take it more. We have to work on it more. We have to work on our thought and our speech and our action to reveal the goodness and to be constantly joyful and be looking for the good side of things. But it takes training. It takes training, thought, speech, and action to manifest the bitachon, the trust that it's all good, it's going to be good. A couple of decades ago, my wife's brother passed away in a hang gliding accident. And of course, he was young, married. It was tragic. It was really tragic. We talked about, okay, where's the silver lining? Where are the good things? What can we talk about that was good? Well, he was on vacation. He was on vacation with his wife and friends. They had rented a cabin on the beach in Hawaii, and he loved Hawaii. He had been out swimming with dolphins the day before, and he'd done that before, and he talked about how wonderful it was and how calming it was, how much he loved doing it. But his real passion was flight. He was a pilot for American Airlines, and he loved to fly. He loved to fly for the flying, and he did not want to do anything commercial with it because he just loved to fly. But obviously, bills start coming in, and you have to be realistic at some point. So he acquiesced to use his passion for something that he enjoys doing, but to actually make some money on it. So he became a pilot for American Airlines, and he was in Hawaii. He was with family. He was with friends. He was with his spouse. Was having a great time on vacation, and he had been out hang gliding the day before, and he was doing hang gliding again. So we started focusing on all the beautiful blessings that if he had to pass away, wow, it had been a really amazing time, an amazing place, and good things had been happening, and he was with the people he cared, and he died in his wife's arms. So for him, and it was quick. It wasn't a long thing. It was on the medical term, doc, it was a ruptured aorta.
Ooh,
and so it was relatively quick, and so we could do the opposite. We could say all the negative things. How could it happen when he was on vacation? How could it happen when he was surrounded by friends? We could take a negative track on all this, but if we focus on the positive, then again, we're learning to stay focused on positive things and to find the positive in the challenges. There was this a gal who, she and her husband did a great mitzvah. They sponsored the writing of a Sefer Torah for a synagogue, and they were having a celebration, a siyum celebration of completing the Torah writing. The last few lines were being filled in at their home. The Sefer was there. He was writing it. There was a party. People got a chance to fill in a letter in the Sefer Torah, and then they were going to march from their home back to the synagogue. Everyone Simchas Torah dancing. The synagogue, the Torahs in the synagogue would come out from the synagogue, and they would do dancing in the streets before they would bring the usher the new Torah in, and they would continue dancing in this. It was a marvelous celebration. It was a wonderful event. One of her friends that came had a heart attack and died at the event.
oh boy.
And she wrote to the Rebbe, how could such a thing be allowed to mar such a beautiful celebration? Well, it's terrible. How could, and the Rebbe empathized. I'm sorry that such a thing had to happen, and that it had to happen on your watch in your home, and the Rebbe empathized with her. But he said, but maybe we could change the lens a little bit and realize if she had been at home when she had the heart attack, she would have been alone. And how long would it have been till someone even knew she had a heart attack? And if she was home alone, here she was surrounded by friends, and she was at a holy event. This neshama, this passed at a phenomenal holy event, and in a personal friend's home, and took the whole story and put it through a different lens to say, wow, if she had to go, you were blessed with the opportunity to host this transitional period in your home at a holy time where she was surrounded by people who care. Wow, what a blessing. So it's the lesson, it's how we choose to see it. And as we were talking about before the class began, Edith Eger talks about, and Viktor Frankl talk about from the stimulus to the response, we have a choice. The choice is, how do we respond? Do we find the positive in a negative situation, or do we focus on the negative? Do we talk about, wow, rose bushes have thorns? Or do we celebrate the fact that a thorn bush has roses? Or do we complain because a rose bush has thorns? It's our reaction to and how we choose to see it. So back to David's comment, thought, speech, and action. If we can compel our thought and our speech and our actions to focus on Tracht gut with zein gut, to focus on the positive things, I think we then manifest those positive things in our life.
It's definitely a goal. Yeah, I think you have to feel confident enough in yourself and your outlook that you don't have to think about it. Because when tragedy happens, you're not going to stop and think, well, what's the good in this and what's the bad? It has to be an instantaneous reaction where you're not going to get wound up in the sorrow, but look for the good.
But that's training, because we have to train ourselves.
Yeah.
As David said, thought and speech and action. It's a process. We have to train ourselves, but it's a conscientious effort. And maybe it will become second habit.
That's what it should become.
Yeah. But that's by training. That is not the human default.
It's not the default. You could do it in your sleep.
No. We have to work on it. But that's the beauty, is that if we work on this betachon, this trust in our thought and our speech and our action, and we live a joyous life, choosing to live a joyous life, it does become second nature. And then we definitely do reap the benefits that come from it. But it is an effort. It is a job, but it has its definite rewards to it. And I think that's part of the journey. That's part of the task down here. If we're looking to create a dwelling place for God down here in the physical realm, we have to see God's world not as a jungle, but as a garden, and a beautiful garden. And the more we see and focus on the beautiful garden, then the more it can manifest itself. I look around at our world today, and there's terrible things going on. But there's never been a time in history when change could happen so fast, when things can change with positive things and a speed of what has never been before. We can communicate good things. We can collaborate new things in ways we never had before. And even during this pandemic, we can choose to look at all the negative things that have happened and the loss of life. That's real. That's 100% real. But we can also choose to focus on all the tremendous things that have happened. Not the least of which is this class. The fact that we can share this time together on a weekly basis over Zoom. A year ago,
who heard of Zoom a year ago?
So we can choose if we want to focus on all the positive things and the opportunities that have come out of this. I know I had a question last night regarding a class in civil air patrol, where we're talking about conferences and classes and the opportunities when we were forced to do our conferences over these internet meeting systems, whether that's this one or the myriad that are out there. We found that we could, and that we could succeed, and we could build relationships this format. And so the person I was talking to is in Alaska, and for her to attend conferences is far more expensive than most of us. They're continental, right? But last year she was able to participate in the national conference via internet, got a lot out of it. And therefore, this year, God willing, it'll be a hybrid, some in person, some over internet. But we're not going backwards. We know we can do this. So we're not going to let go of this opportunity, but we're going to be doing combined efforts that will combine the best of the opportunities. Is it better to be in person? It's so much better to be in person. But if I can't, that doesn't mean I'm not going to be there.
Right.
So we don't go backwards, right? So Tracht gut wird zein gut. Let's focus on all the positive things. And again, thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your insights along the way.
Thank you for your wisdom.
Have a fantastic week, and we'll meet again next week.
I look forward to it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye, David.